The first time my sister called me a freeloader, it wasn't in private. It was at her kitchen table under warm pendant lights with her husband sipping wine and my mother pretending not to hear. I had asked her for $1,000. Just $1,000. Not a loan to start a business, not a bailout, just enough to cover rent for a month while I waited for a delayed payment from a contract job. I even told her I'd pay it back within 6 weeks. I had the emails, the invoices, the proof. She didn't ask to see any of it. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and laughed. "So, let me get this straight," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're in your 30s still, can't manage your money, and now you're here asking me to support you." I felt my face burn. "I'm not asking you to support me," I said carefully. "I'm asking for help. Once." Her husband looked uncomfortable. My mother stared at her plate. My sister smiled the kind of smile she reserved for moments when she knew she had the upper hand. "You've always been like this," she said, "running to family whenever life gets hard. You don't struggle, you coast. You always have." That word stayed with me. Freeloader. She said it again slower this time, like she wanted it to sink in. I'm not an ATM for people who refuse to grow up. I didn't cry. Not there. I nodded, stood up, and thanked her for her honesty. That night I slept in my car. Not because I had nowhere else to go, because I needed to understand something. How had I become the family burden in a story where I had quietly carried everyone else for years? I was the one who took care of our father during his illness while she built her career across the country. The one who moved back home when our mother couldn't manage alone. The one who handled paperwork, hospital calls, insurance forms, and late-night emergencies without ever asking for recognition. But none of that counted, because I didn't have her house, her title, her income. In our family, success was loud. Invisible work didn't exist. I left town the next morning without telling anyone. I told myself I wasn't running. I was creating space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to finally look at my family, not as roles I had to fulfill, but as people who benefited from me staying small. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received an email meant for my sister. It was forwarded to me by accident from a shared family account we'd forgotten existed. A careless mistake. The kind that only happens when someone believes they are untouchable. The email wasn't about money. It was about risk. And as I read it sitting alone in a borrowed apartment with nothing but my laptop and a cup of cold coffee, I realized something that made my hands shake. My sister's success wasn't as solid as she claimed, and the family fortune she loved to remind me I didn't deserve. It was standing on ground far thinner than anyone knew. That was the moment I stopped asking for help and started asking questions. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth. But I learned very quickly that once you uncover the truth in a family built on appearances, revenge becomes unavoidable. And by the time my sister realized I was no longer the freeloader she could dismiss, it was already too late. Because I had learned something she never did. Power doesn't come from having more money. It comes from knowing where the silence is hiding. And I was done staying quiet. I didn't confront my sister after that email. That was the first real change in me. Old me would have called her immediately, voice shaking with questions, half apologizing for existing while trying to sound reasonable. Old me believed clarity came from conversation, from fairness, from explaining yourself until someone finally understood. New me understood something different. People who benefit from misunderstanding you will never seek clarity. So I stayed silent. The email sat open on my laptop for hours. It was from a senior partner at her firm, marked confidential, discussing exposure, internal review, and contingency planning. Words polished enough to sound harmless but sharp underneath. There were numbers attached, projections, timelines, and one line that made my stomach tighten. "We cannot afford family involvement if this escalates." Family involvement. I wasn't supposed to see it. I wasn't supposed to know that the woman who called me a freeloader was one audit, one whistleblower, one misstep away from losing everything she used to define herself. I closed the laptop and went for a long walk. The city where I had landed was anonymous in the best way. No family friends, no shared history, no expectations, just strangers moving through their own lives, unaware that mine had quietly cracked open. That night I made a list, not of grievances, of facts. What I knew, what I suspected, what I needed to confirm. I remembered things I had dismissed for years. My sister's sudden career leaps, the way she shut down conversations about specifics, how defensive she became whenever our parents asked questions, how she always redirected praise toward hard work and sacrifice, never details. She had always needed to be admired. Admiration, I was learning, was her oxygen. Over the next few weeks, I took temporary work, Quiet contracts, consulting projects that paid just enough to stabilize me. I didn't tell my family where I was. I didn't answer calls. I wasn't punishing them. I was observing them. My mother left voicemails that sounded concerned but not worried. Concern, I had learned, was performative in our family. Worry required accountability. My sister sent one text. "Hope you figured things out. No apology, no follow-up." That told me everything. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A woman named Claire, who used to work under my sister before leaving abruptly. At the time, the family story was that Claire couldn't handle the pressure. Claire answered my message within an hour. We met for coffee on a rainy afternoon. She looked healthier than I remembered, calmer, less tense. "I was waiting for you to ask," she said after I explained why I was there. That sentence sent a chill through me. "Ask what I said." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "Whether your sister is actually who she says she is." Claire didn't sound bitter. She sounded relieved. "She's brilliant," Claire said, "but not in the way people think. She knows how to position herself, how to delegate risk, how to let other people take the fall." My chest tightened. "She used you," I said. Claire nodded, "and she'll use anyone who lets her." Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "She learned it at home." That hurt more than I expected. Claire explained how projects were quietly reassigned, how questionable decisions were framed as team consensus, how failures always landed on someone else's desk, how success was claimed loudly and publicly while mistakes were handled privately and ruthlessly. "She's terrified of looking ordinary," Claire said. "That fear makes people dangerous." When I got back to my apartment, I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about the kitchen table, the pendant lights, the way my sister laughed when she called me a freeloader. It hadn't been spontaneous. It had been rehearsed. She needed me to be small so she could stay large. A week later, my mother finally said something real. "I don't understand why you embarrassed your sister," she said during a phone call. I laughed softly. I asked for help. "You put her in an awkward position," my mother replied. "She has responsibilities." "And I asked. Silence. That silence was familiar. It was the same one that followed every moment where I needed support instead of being useful. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. I titled it simply Timeline. I began filling it in. Dates, moves, promotions, family decisions that suddenly made sense when viewed together. Patterns emerged. And patterns, unlike emotions, could be proven. I didn't want to expose my sister out of spite. I wanted her to face the same thing she had forced on me. Accountability without cushioning. By the time my sister realized I was no longer asking for help, I was already building something she couldn't laugh away. Not revenge, leverage. And leverage, I was learning, is what happens when the truth stops being emotional and starts being organized. I slept well that night. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. Because I finally understood something my sister never had. Being underestimated is not a weakness. It's an opportunity. And I was done wasting it. Leverage changes the way you see people. Once you stop asking them for anything, their words lose power. Their tone shifts. Their confidence wobbles in small, almost imperceptible ways. I noticed it the first time my sister called after weeks of silence. She didn't start with concern. She started with irritation. "Why aren't you answering, Mom?" she asked, skipping any pretense of warmth. "You're making things tense." Tense, not worried, not hurt. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment and smiled to myself. "I've been busy," I said calmly. With what she pressed, I chose my words carefully. "Work." She exhaled sharply as if annoyed by my refusal to elaborate. My sister had always believed information flowed upward to her, that she was entitled to context explanations reassurance. When she didn't get it, she filled the silence with assumptions. "I hope you're not doing anything reckless," she said. "You don't always think things through." That was her favorite line, the family-approved summary of my entire personality. "I'm thinking very clearly," I replied. She paused. Just a beat too long. Something in my tone had unsettled her. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and returned to the timeline. I added the call, her phrasing, the emotional temperature. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition. Claire had given me names, departments, internal language, enough to start mapping my sister's professional world from the outside in. I wasn't hacking. I wasn't stealing. I was listening, watching public filings, reading industry gossip the way other people read horoscopes. Slowly, a picture formed. My sister didn't just manage risk. She exported it. To subordinates, to partners, to family, especially to family. I remembered the way she leaned on me when our father died, how she let me handle the logistics while she made appearances, how she cried publicly and disappeared privately, how everyone praised her strength while I stayed up nights untangling paperwork. That wasn't generosity. That was training. I took a short-term consulting role with a mid-sized firm connected to her industry. Not directly. One step removed. Close enough to hear things, far enough to stay invisible. People talked more than they realized. They always do when they assume you're harmless. One evening after a late meeting, a senior analyst lingered behind. "You're good at connecting dots," he said casually. "Have you ever worked with Meridian Solutions?" Meridian, my sister's firm. I kept my expression neutral, not directly. He nodded. "Smart. They look impressive from the outside." I waited. He lowered his voice. "But they move fast. Too fast. That kind of growth usually leaves footprints." "What kind?" I asked. He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "The kind people hope don't lead back to them." That night I didn't sleep. Not from fear. From confirmation. I wasn't imagining things. The email hadn't been an anomaly. It was a warning flare. One my sister assumed no one would notice because no one ever had. The next family gathering came sooner than I expected. My mother insisted on a Sunday dinner. She framed it as concern, healing, togetherness. I agreed to come, not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted proximity. When I walked into my sister's house, she froze for half a second before smiling. That half second told me everything. She hugged me stiffly. "You look well." I smiled back. "So do you." Dinner was a performance. My sister talked about work without saying anything. My mother nodded proudly. Her husband stayed quiet, eyes flicking between us, like he sensed a current he didn't understand. At one point, my sister turned to me and said loudly, "So have you figured out your situation yet?" There it was. The old script. I set my fork down gently. "Yes." She tilted her head. "Doing what?" I met her eyes. "Consulting." Her smile faltered, just slightly. "Oh," she said. "For who?" "Various clients," I replied. My mother frowned. "Is it stable?" I smiled again. "It doesn't need to be. I am." That landed harder than I intended. My sister laughed too loudly. "Well, that's good. Independence suits you." Independence? She said it like a compliment, like she hadn't punished me for needing help weeks earlier. After dinner, she cornered me in the hallway. "You're being strange," she said quietly. "Distant." "I've always been distant," I replied. "You just didn't notice." Her eyes narrowed. "If this is about the money—" "It's not," I said. That was the truth. The money had never been the point. It was the contempt. The assumption that I would accept it quietly. As I drove away that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Heads up," it read. "Your sister's name came up today, not positively." I pulled over and called her. "They're preparing," Claire said. "I don't know for what yet, but she's tense." I closed my eyes. Good. Tension makes people careless. Over the next month, my sister began to slip. Not publicly, not yet, but privately. She called more often, asked vague questions, tried to reassert familiarity, authority. "You don't need to carry everything alone," she said once. "Family is there for support." I almost laughed. The irony was breathtaking. "You're right," I said. "Support matters." She exhaled relieved. She thought she was regaining ground. She didn't know that every conversation, every shift in her tone, every attempt to reframe the narrative was being documented, not emotionally, strategically. I wasn't plotting her downfall. I was letting her walk toward it on her own. All I had to do was stay still. Because when someone builds their power on making others feel small, they panic when those people stop shrinking. And my sister was starting to panic. She just didn't know yet how loud the fall would be. The first crack showed up in public. Not in a headline, not in a lawsuit, in a pause. It happened during a panel discussion my sister moderated for her firm. I watched the live stream from my apartment laptop balanced on my knees, coffee untouched beside me. She sat on stage in a tailored blazer, posture, perfect voice, confident. The same version of her the family worshipped, until someone asked a question she hadn't rehearsed for. A junior partner in the audience raised his hand and asked about a recent restructuring Meridian Solutions had quietly implemented. He mentioned a project timeline that didn't match the public filings. My sister smiled, nodded, opened her mouth, and stopped. It was less than 2 seconds, but it was real. She recovered quickly, deflecting with industry jargon. But I saw it. The flicker of recalculation. The moment she realized someone else was holding a piece of the map. My phone buzzed almost immediately. "Claire." She didn't expect that question. People noticed. I leaned back and exhaled. Pressure doesn't break people all at once. It changes their posture, their sleep, their patience. And my sister's patience had always been thin. She called me that night. "I saw you watching," she said without greeting. I hadn't commented, hadn't liked anything, hadn't said a word. "You always imagine yourself at the center," I replied calmly. Silence. Then softer, "I don't like being surprised." "That's understandable," I said. "Neither do I." Her voice tightened. "If you're talking to people—" "I talk to lots of people," I said. That was the moment she understood something had shifted. Not what, but that something had. Over the next weeks, she became restless. She over-explained at family gatherings, corrected small details no one challenged. Her confidence started to sound defensive. Our mother noticed. "She seems tired," she said to me one afternoon, like it was my responsibility to explain. "She carries a lot," I replied. That was still true, just not in the way my mother meant. I kept working, quietly, methodically. The consulting role expanded. More connections, more context, enough to confirm what I already suspected. Meridian's growth wasn't organic. It was accelerated by shortcuts, aggressive reallocations, risk buried under optimism and charm. My sister wasn't stupid, she was strategic. But strategy without accountability eventually collapses, especially when built on silence. The opportunity came unexpectedly. An independent review board announced an open call for external consultants to assist with a compliance evaluation tied to a regional funding initiative. Meridian was one of the firms involved. Claire texted me the link with one word: apply. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. I submitted my credentials without mentioning my sister. Different last name, clean record, relevant experience, nothing personal. 3 weeks later, I was accepted. I didn't tell my family. The first day of the review, I walked into a neutral conference space where Meridian's senior leadership would be presenting internal documentation. My sister wasn't there yet. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not excitement, not fear, readiness. When she walked in and saw me sitting at the table, her face went pale. Just for a moment, then the mask snapped back into place. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice tight. "Working," I said. The room went quiet. Someone cleared their throat. Introductions resumed awkwardly. Titles were exchanged, roles clarified. No one asked about the connection. Professionally, we were equals. Emotionally, she was unraveling. She avoided my gaze during the presentation, fumbled a slide, corrected herself too quickly. The same patterns I'd been tracking for months now amplified under scrutiny. At lunch, she cornered me in the hallway. "You did this on purpose," she hissed. I replied, the same way anyone else did. "You're trying to embarrass me." I looked at her carefully. "I'm doing my job." Her eyes searched my face, looking for guilt, for hesitation, for the sister who would apologize just to make things easier. She didn't find her. That afternoon, I reviewed documents she assumed no one would read closely. I asked neutral questions that landed like pressure points. I flagged inconsistencies without commentary. Professional, polite, precise. By the end of the day, her confidence was gone. That night, my mother called me frantic. "What's going on with you and your sister?" she demanded. "She says you're trying to hurt her." I closed my eyes. "I asked for help once," I said quietly. "She told me I was a freeloader. Everything since then has been consequences." My mother didn't respond. She never did when truth disrupted her narrative. The review stretched into weeks. Findings accumulated. Not criminal, not yet, but damning. Recommendations were drafted. Oversight increased. Funding paused pending further evaluation. Meridian's board began to panic. And panic, I learned, makes people careless. My sister confronted me one final time late in the evening after a long session. "You think this makes you better than me?" she asked, voice shaking. "No," I said, "it makes me honest." She laughed bitterly. "You always wanted recognition." I shook my head. "I wanted respect. You confused the two." Her shoulders sagged. For the first time, I saw her without the armor, without the narrative. Just a woman who had built her worth on being untouchable and was now realizing how fragile that made her. "You could have asked me," she said quietly. "I did," I replied. "You called me a burden." She looked away. The review concluded the following week. Meridian survived. But my sister didn't. She was removed from leadership quietly, reassigned, her public image intact, but her power gone. The firm framed it as restructuring. Family called it bad luck. I called it balance. She didn't speak to me after that, and I didn't chase her, because the revenge I chose wasn't destruction. It was inversion. I didn't take anything from her. I stopped holding her up. And without that support, she finally had to carry the weight of who she really was, alone. The irony didn't escape me. The sister who called me a freeloader had been standing on borrowed silence for years, and all I did was stop paying the cost. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No screaming phone calls, no dramatic confrontations, no family meeting where everything finally got said out loud. Just a subtle shift in gravity, like a building settling after a long hidden fault finally gave way. My sister stopped calling. At first, that felt strange. For years, her voice had been a constant presence in my life, directing, correcting, evaluating. Even her criticism had been a form of attention. Now there was nothing No updates, no complaints, no carefully phrased concern disguised as authority. Silence can be peaceful or punishing. This one was both. My mother filled the gap, of course. She always did when the balance of the family tilted. She's having a hard time, she told me during one of our conversations. You know how much pressure she's been under. I listened without interrupting. She worked so hard for that position, my mother continued. People are being unfair. Unfair. I wondered how many times that word had been used about me when I wasn't in the room. I didn't cause the review, I said calmly. I didn't make her decisions. I didn't remove her from leadership. But you were involved, my mother insisted. You didn't have to be. There it was. The unspoken rule finally spoken. I was allowed to survive. I was not allowed to participate. I was hired, I replied. I did my job. My mother sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. Not in my sister, in me. You could have chosen family, she said. I felt something in my chest loosen. I did, I said quietly. I chose myself. She didn't respond. That was the end of the call. In the weeks that followed, news filtered back to me through indirect channels. Friends of friends, industry whispers. My sister had been moved to an advisory role. Same salary, less influence. Her name still appeared on the website, but no longer at the top, no longer central. She hated that. She had always believed visibility was proof of worth. Without it, she didn't know who she was. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing anyone else's emotions. I wasn't smoothing conflict, absorbing tension, making myself smaller to keep the peace. My energy returned slowly like circulation after a limb falls asleep. I took on longer-term work, built a small but steady client base, chose projects that aligned with my values instead of just my skill set. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. One afternoon, Claire called me. She's blaming you, she said bluntly. I assumed she would, I replied. She says you planned it, that you've always been jealous. I laughed softly. Of what? Claire paused. That's exactly what I said. We sat in silence for a moment. You okay? Claire asked. Yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. The real test came a month later. A family gathering. Small. My mother's birthday. Neutral territory. I debated not going, but something in me wanted to see what the room felt like now that the hierarchy had shifted. My sister arrived late. She looked the same at first glance. Hair perfect, outfit expensive, smile practiced. But when she saw me, something in her posture tightened. She didn't approach, didn't perform. She stayed near the edge of the room talking to people who didn't ask questions. At one point, we ended up alone near the kitchen. I hope you're happy, she said without looking at me. I am, I replied. She scoffed. You always wanted to tear me down. I turned to face her fully. No, I wanted you to stop tearing me down. She finally looked at me then, really looked. You could have helped me, she said quietly. I asked you for help, I said. You humiliated me. Her jaw tightened. That was different, she said. Only to you, I replied. We stood there, the distance between us suddenly unbridgeable. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But pity is just another form of imbalance, and I was done with that too. That night after I got home, I thought about the word freeloader, how casually she had used it, how easily it had stuck to me because part of me had already believed it, because my value had always been defined by how useful I was to others. I opened a journal and wrote a single sentence, needing help does not make you a burden. I read it until it felt true. The following weeks brought unexpected changes. People from my past reached out. Colleagues who had seen my name on the review committee, professionals who respected the way I worked. Doors opened not because of who my sister was, but because of who I had proven myself to be. That mattered. One evening, my sister sent me a message. Just one line. I don't know how to do this without being in charge. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, you don't have to be in charge to be worthy. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to. Growth. I was learning is not contagious. It's optional, and people only choose it when the alternative becomes unbearable. I didn't know yet how this story would end, whether my sister would ever face herself honestly, whether my mother would accept a version of family that didn't revolve around hierarchy and sacrifice. But I knew this much. I was no longer the family freeloader. I was no longer the quiet support beam holding up someone else's image. I was standing in my own life now. And for the first time, I understood the real twist in all of this. I hadn't taken revenge by exposing my sister. I had taken it by refusing to carry her anymore. And once I let go, everything else fell into place exactly as it should. The strange thing about reclaiming your life is how ordinary it feels once it begins. No fireworks, no announcement, just a steady sense that you are no longer bracing for impact every time your phone buzzes or a family event appears on the calendar. I noticed it one morning when I realized I had gone an entire week without thinking about my sister at all. That had never happened before. Work filled my days now in a way that felt intentional. Not frantic, not compensatory. I chose clients carefully. I asked questions before saying yes. I stopped over-delivering just to prove my worth. The world did not collapse when I set boundaries. If anything, it seemed to respect them. That realization alone felt like a quiet revolution. Then, just as I began to settle into this new equilibrium, the past reached out again. Not through my sister, but through my father. He had been quiet throughout everything, silent in the way men of his generation often were, choosing neutrality and calling it peace. He called me one evening, his voice hesitant. "Your mother told me things have been strained," he said. I almost smiled. Strained was generous. "I imagine they have," I replied. He cleared his throat. "She's worried about the family, about how things look." There it was again. Appearances. The unspoken priority. "And how do things look to you?" I asked. He paused. "Longer this time." "Different," he said finally. "Quieter." "Is that bad?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm not used to it." That honesty surprised me. We talked longer than we ever had. About work, about aging, about how easy it was to let stronger personalities set the tone just to avoid conflict. He didn't apologize. He didn't defend anyone. He just listened. When the call ended, I felt something shift. Not heal, but loosen. A few days later, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. It was from Meridian's compliance board. They were inviting me to continue consulting on a separate project unrelated to my sister, a longer contract, better pay, full autonomy. I stared at the offer for a long time. Accepting it meant something important. It meant my role there had not been tolerated. It had been valued. I accepted. The irony was not lost on me. The place where my sister had lost power was now offering me stability. When my mother found out, she didn't hide her discomfort. "I don't think it's healthy," she said, "staying so close to everything." "I'm not close to her," I replied. "I'm close to my work." She frowned. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." "I'm not," I said gently. "I'm building something." That distinction seemed to confuse her. In her world, effort was always reactive, defensive, a response to threat. She didn't understand creation that wasn't fueled by fear. A month later, my sister finally reached out again, not with accusation, not with anger, with vulnerability. She asked to meet. I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed to be honest with myself. Did I want closure? Or did I just want confirmation that I had won? Winning no longer interested me, but clarity did. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground, no memories attached. She arrived early. That alone told me something was different. She looked tired, not unkempt, just worn in a way that success had always hidden before. "I don't know how to start," she said. "You don't have to," I replied. "Say what's true." She took a breath. "I was angry when you asked me for money." I waited. "It wasn't about the money," she continued. "It was about what it represented. I was terrified that if I helped you, I'd slip, that I'd lose the ground I'd fought so hard to stand on." I nodded slowly. "So you pushed me down instead." Her eyes filled. "I didn't think of it like that." "That doesn't change what it was," I said calmly. She wiped her face with a napkin. "I don't know who I am without being the strong one." I studied her, the sister I had admired, resented, protected, feared. "You're allowed to find out," I said, "but not by standing on me." She nodded. "I know." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, but honest. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I don't think I've earned that." "I'm not offering it," I replied. Not because I'm cruel, because I'm still learning what trust feels like without fear. She accepted that. That mattered. We parted without hugging, without promises, just with an understanding that something fundamental had shifted. We were no longer in a hierarchy. We were just two adults with shared history and separate paths. Driving home, I felt an unexpected sense of grief, not for what had happened, but for what never would. The fantasy of a sister who protected instead of competed, a family where help didn't come with humiliation. Grief, I realized, doesn't mean you want the past back. It means you've stopped pretending it was something it wasn't. That night, I wrote another sentence in my journal. Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which ones were never built to hold weight. Weeks passed, then months. Life expanded in quiet ways. New routines, new friendships, a sense of internal steadiness I had never known before. The label my sister had thrown at me that night in her kitchen no longer fit. Freeloader. It had never been true. It had just been convenient. And now that I no longer accepted it, no one else could make it stick. The most unexpected twist in all of this wasn't my sister's fall or my rise. It was the realization that I had never needed to take anything from her to be whole. All I had to do was stop asking for permission to exist. And that, more than any confrontation or exposure, changed everything. There is a moment after you set a boundary when the world waits to see if you will apologize for it. I noticed it in the days after meeting my sister. No dramatic fallout, no emotional backlash, just a subtle expectation hanging in the air, as if my family assumed I would circle back, soften my words, reassure everyone that nothing had really changed. I didn't, and that silence unsettled them more than any argument ever had. My mother called twice that week. The first time she asked practical questions. How was work? Was I eating well? The second time she shifted. Your sister seems different, she said carefully, quieter. That happens when someone loses an audience, I replied. She didn't like that. You don't have to be so hard, she said. She's struggling. I felt the old instinct rise in my chest, the reflex to soothe, to explain, to absorb the discomfort so no one else had to. I let it pass. I'm not being hard, I said. I'm being honest. Honesty, I was learning, sounds like cruelty to people who benefited from your silence. Work continued to ground me. The longer contract with Meridian demanded focus and precision. I spent days reviewing policies, interviewing teams, mapping risk. People listened to me. They respected my assessments. No one laughed. No one minimized my input. No one asked me to prove my worth beyond the work itself. That contrast stayed with me. One afternoon, a junior associate pulled me aside. I heard you were brought in because you don't flinch, she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. From what? From pressure, she replied. From powerful people. I smiled faintly. I flinch. I just don't retreat anymore. She nodded like that mattered. That evening, I received a message from my sister that surprised me. Do you ever miss how things were? I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. No, I typed. I miss who I thought we could be. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. I don't know how to fix this, she finally wrote. I set my phone down. Not everything broken is meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be understood and then left alone. The real test came during a family gathering I hadn't planned to attend. A cousin's engagement dinner, neutral territory, lots of people, witnesses. I went because I wanted to see how it felt to walk into a room without armor. My sister arrived late again. She avoided me at first, stayed near our parents, played the familiar role. But halfway through dinner, she stood to make a toast. Her voice trembled just slightly. Family, she began, is complicated. We don't always get things right, but I'm grateful for the chance to learn. Eyes flicked toward me, subtle, curious. I felt no urge to respond. No need to correct the narrative. Her words were vague enough to mean anything and nothing. After dinner, my father approached me quietly. I should have stepped in, he said, a long time ago. I studied his face, older, softer. Yes, I said, you should have. He nodded, accepting it without defense. That mattered more than any apology. Later that night as I drove home, I realized something unexpected. The revenge story everyone expects is explosive, public, final. Mine wasn't. It was quiet. It was choosing not to shrink so someone else could stay large. It was refusing to accept a label that never belonged to me. It was understanding that asking for help once does not define your worth, but how people respond to that request reveals theirs. My sister called me a freeloader because it protected her story. I let go of that story. And when I did, everything else began to rearrange itself around the truth. I wasn't climbing over her. I was stepping out of her shadow. And that I realized was the only revenge that actually lasts. I didn't realize how deeply the word freeloader had embedded itself in me until it stopped echoing. For weeks after the engagement dinner, I noticed small changes in how I moved through the world. I spoke up faster in meetings. I declined projects that felt misaligned without over-explaining. I rested without guilt. These weren't dramatic acts of rebellion. They were quiet refusals to keep paying an emotional debt that was never mine, and that it turned out made people uncomfortable. My mother began inviting me to lunch more often. Casual, public, safe. At first, she avoided anything personal, as if proximity alone might restore the old balance. But eventually, the tension surfaced. "You've changed," she said one afternoon, stirring her soup without eating it. "Yes," I replied. She frowned. "I don't know if I like it." I smiled gently. "You don't have to." She looked up sharply. For years, that would have been the moment I backtracked, apologized, softened the edge, reassured her that she was still central, still needed. I didn't. "I feel like I'm losing my family," she said quietly. I considered her words carefully. "You're losing control," I said. "That's not the same thing." Her spoon clinked against the bowl. "That's unfair." "No," I replied. "It's just unfamiliar." She didn't argue. She didn't agree either, but she heard me. A week later, the real twist arrived. I received an email from Meridian's board requesting a private meeting. No agenda listed. just a time and place. When I arrived, the room was full. Senior leadership, legal counsel, faces serious but not hostile. The chairwoman spoke first. "We want to offer you a permanent role," she said. "Director of Internal Ethics and Compliance." I blinked. That's significant. "We believe in what you bring," she continued. "You ask questions others avoid. You don't personalize pushback. And frankly, you're trusted." Trusted. That word landed harder than any title. "There's something else," the legal counsel added. "Your sister has submitted a formal objection." I nodded slowly. "On what grounds?" "Conflict of interest," he replied, "which we've reviewed extensively." And I asked. "It doesn't hold," he said simply. The chairwoman leaned forward. "We won't pretend this isn't complicated, but we won't punish integrity to preserve comfort." I accepted the offer on the spot. When my sister found out, she didn't call, she didn't text, she sent a single email. "So you really are replacing me?" I stared at the sentence for a long time. Then I typed back. "No, I'm doing work you never wanted to do." She didn't respond. That week, something shifted publicly, subtly but unmistakably. People began associating my name with transparency, accountability, steadiness. Invitations followed, panels, consultations, quiet respect. My sister, meanwhile, faded further into the background. Still present, still well paid, but no longer central, no longer deferred to. I saw her once in passing at the office. She looked through me like I was a stranger. That hurt more than anger would have, but it also clarified something. She didn't know how to see me without the hierarchy, without being above me, without defining herself against me. That wasn't my loss. The real confrontation came unexpectedly. My father invited both of us to dinner, just the three of us. He said he wanted honesty. I almost declined, but something told me this was a necessary reckoning. We sat in his quiet dining room, the same one where we'd celebrated promotions and birthdays and never addressed tension. The air felt heavier than usual. "I want to understand," he said, looking between us, "how we got here." My sister spoke first. "She betrayed me," she said flatly. I waited. She took my position. She continued. "She aligned herself with people who wanted me gone." I took a breath. I didn't take anything I said. I applied. I was hired. I worked. "You knew what it would do to me," my sister snapped. "Yes," I replied, "the same way you knew what humiliating me would do." Silence fell. My father rubbed his hands together. "That was different," he said weakly. "No," I said. "It was just earlier." I turned to my sister. "When I asked you for $1,000, you didn't say no. You made a statement about who I was. You reduced me to a label so you wouldn't have to see me clearly." She scoffed. "You were desperate." "I was human," I replied. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I didn't plan to hurt you," she said finally. "I just didn't think you mattered that much." The honesty stunned the room. My father's face fell. I nodded slowly. "That's the truth I needed," I said, "not an apology." I stood up. "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to stop participating in a system where my worth is conditional." My sister looked at me like she didn't recognize me. That was okay? Driving home, I felt strangely calm. Not victorious, not sad, grounded, because the final twist wasn't her downfall or my rise. It was this. The moment she admitted it out loud that she never believed I mattered. And the moment I realized that I didn't need her belief anymore. Power, I had learned, doesn't come from taking someone else's place. It comes from refusing to accept the place they assigned you. And once you do that, the story changes whether they like it or not. I slept deeply that night. Not because everything was resolved, but because I finally was. The days after that dinner felt strangely weightless. Not because anything had been resolved, but because nothing was left to pretend about. The truth had been said out loud without drama or decoration. My sister hadn't lashed out. My father hadn't defended her. No one rushed to soften the moment. The illusion that we were all just misunderstood had finally collapsed. And with it, a pressure I had carried for most of my life quietly lifted. I returned to work with a sharper focus than ever. The permanent role came with authority, but more importantly, with access. I reviewed policies that had never been questioned, interviewed executives who were used to being deferred to, and documented risks that had been minimized for years. Some resisted me at first. "You're thorough," one senior manager said, not quite a compliment. "I'm accountable," I replied. "There's a difference." He didn't argue. I noticed something else, too. People began bringing me problems before they became crises. Quietly, privately. They trusted that I would listen without humiliating them. That trust felt earned in a way nothing else ever had. Meanwhile, my sister retreated. Not dramatically. She still attended meetings, still spoke when asked, but the ease was gone. The automatic authority she once carried no longer filled the room. People questioned her, gently, politely, but consistently. She hated that more than outright opposition. One afternoon, I found her sitting alone in a conference room staring at her laptop without typing. She looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across her face. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked suddenly. Of what I replied. "Being the reasonable one," she said, "the calm one." I considered the question. "No," I said. "I get tired of pretending I'm not angry, but I don't pretend anymore." She nodded slowly, as if absorbing something she'd never allowed herself to consider. Our mother, on the other hand, was struggling. She invited me over one evening, claiming she needed help with paperwork. When I arrived, the forms sat untouched on the table. She poured tea and sat across from me, hands clasped tightly. "I don't recognize this family," she said. I waited. "You used to need us," she continued. "You used to come to me." "I still come to you," I said, "just not for permission." She flinched. "That hurts," she said. "I know," I replied gently. "So did being called a burden." She looked away. "Your sister didn't mean it like that." "She meant it exactly like that," I said. "She just didn't expect consequences." My mother's voice shook. "I just wanted things to be easier." "For who?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. A week later, my sister made a decision that surprised everyone. She resigned. Not publicly, not with explanation. She accepted a position at a smaller firm in another city, lower profile, less visibility, fewer eyes. When she told me, her voice was steady. "I need to know who I am without competing," she said. I nodded. "That's honest." She hesitated. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I'm not withholding forgiveness," I replied. "I'm just not offering it as a shortcut." She accepted that. The family reacted predictably. My mother mourned the image of success more than the distance. My father remained quiet, thoughtful. Extended relatives whispered about betrayal and ambition. I didn't correct them. I had learned that people tell stories to protect themselves from uncomfortable truths. The real shift came internally. I stopped bracing, stopped anticipating blame, stopped editing myself for harmony that only flowed one way. One evening, alone in my apartment, I thought back to that kitchen table, the pendant lights, the wine glasses, the word freeloader hanging in the air like a verdict. If I could speak to that version of myself now, I wouldn't tell her to fight back. I would tell her to leave. Not physically, emotionally. Because the moment you stop asking for validation from people invested in your inferiority, you become dangerous in the quietest possible way. You become free. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had asked for $1,000. What I got instead was clarity worth far more. And my sister, who once defined herself by being needed and admired, was finally learning something she had avoided her whole life. Worth that isn't challenged doesn't grow. As for me, I didn't rise by tearing anyone down. I rose by standing still and refusing to be pushed. And once I did that, the rest of the world adjusted accordingly. The story everyone expected was one of revenge. But the truth was simpler. I stopped being the family freeloader the moment I stopped believing the story they needed me to play. Everything after that was just reality catching up. Distance changes memory. Once my sister moved away, the emotional noise softened. Not vanished, but muted enough that I could hear my own thoughts without interruption. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head, stopped imagining alternate responses that might have protected me sooner. The past began to feel like something that had happened to me, not something that was still happening inside me. Work grounded me in a way family never had. As Director of Ethics and Compliance, I was no longer an accessory to someone else's authority. I was the authority. Not through intimidation, but through consistency. People learned quickly that I didn't weaponize information. I didn't reward loyalty to me. I rewarded honesty. That alone shifted the culture more than any policy ever could. One afternoon during a quarterly review, a senior executive pushed back hard on a recommendation I made. Old instincts stirred for a split second, the urge to soften to compromise prematurely to prove I wasn't difficult. I let it pass. "This isn't about comfort," I said evenly. "It's about sustainability." The room went quiet. Then the chair nodded. "She's right." That was it. No drama, no debate. After the meeting, a colleague leaned over and whispered, "You don't flinch." I smiled faintly. I learned not to. That evening, I received an unexpected message from my sister. It wasn't long. "I finally understand what you meant. I thought power meant never needing anyone. I was wrong." I stared at the screen, surprised by the absence of triumph in my chest. I typed back carefully. "Understanding doesn't undo harm, but it can stop it from repeating." She replied a few minutes later. "I hope so." That was the first time her words didn't feel like positioning. Our mother struggled the most with the new reality. She called less often now, but when she did, there was an edge of uncertainty in her voice, as if she were navigating a room whose furniture had been rearranged without her consent. "You don't come by as much," she said once. "I come when I want to," I replied gently, "not when I feel obligated." She sighed. "I miss when things were simple. They weren't simple, I said. They were just quiet. That truth landed heavily between us. I didn't enjoy hurting her, but I refused to lie to make her comfortable. One weekend, my father invited me to help him clean out the garage, just the two of us, no agenda, no pressure. We worked side by side in silence for a while before he spoke. "You were always the reliable one," he said. "I thought you didn't need much." I set down the box I was holding. I needed fairness. He nodded slowly. "I see that now." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes that's where healing actually begins. As summer turned toward fall, I began speaking at professional events, panels on ethics, leadership, invisible labor. I never mentioned my family. I didn't need to. The themes spoke for themselves. After one talk, a woman in her late 50s approached me, eyes shining. "I was called difficult for asking for help," she said. "I carried that shame for decades." I took her hand. Shame sticks best when it's undeserved. She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. That night I reflected on the strange symmetry of it all. I had asked my sister for $1,000. She had answered with contempt. And in doing so, she had unknowingly handed me something far more valuable. A reason to stop shrinking. A reason to look closely. A reason to step fully into my own authority without apology. The revenge story everyone expects is loud. This one wasn't. It was a slow realignment, a recalibration of power, a refusal to carry weight that was never mine to begin with. By the time my sister understood what she had lost, I wasn't standing where she used to stand. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere steadier, somewhere honest. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by my role in my family. I was defined by my choices. That was the real twist. Not that she fell, but that I no longer needed her to. The closer I came to peace, the more clearly I could see how uncomfortable it made other people. Not angry, not jealous, uncomfortable. There is a difference. Anger wants reaction. Jealousy wants possession. Discomfort just wants things to go back to the way they were when roles were familiar and power sat where everyone expected it to sit. My family felt that discomfort deeply. It surfaced in small ways. My mother correcting my tone when I spoke with certainty. An aunt joking that I had changed careers and personalities. A cousin asking if I was still mad, as if boundaries were a phase I would eventually grow out of. I stopped explaining. Explanation had always been my way of earning safety. If I could make myself understood, maybe I wouldn't be punished for existing. But I was no longer interested in being understood by people who only listened in order to correct me. Work continued to evolve. With authority came visibility, and with visibility came resistance. A few executives tested me early on, subtly pushing limits to see if I would fold. I didn't. Not because I was rigid, but because I was consistent. Consistency is threatening to people who rely on exception. One afternoon, after a tense meeting, the chairwoman asked me to stay behind. "You know," she said, studying me carefully, "people like you often get labeled as difficult." I smiled faintly. "I'm familiar with the term." She nodded. "The difference is here it won't stick." That mattered more than she knew. Around that time, my sister called again. Her voice sounded different now. Less defensive. Less sharp. Like someone speaking without armor for the first time. "I'm not doing well," she admitted. I didn't interrupt. "I thought stepping away would bring relief," she continued. "But without the pressure, everything I avoided is loud." "That happens," I said gently. She exhaled. "I don't know how you live without proving yourself all the time." I thought about it. "I stopped treating my worth like a debate," I said. She was quiet. "I don't think I ever believed I was enough," she said softly. "Just useful." The irony almost hurt. "That belief didn't start with you," I replied. "But you don't have to keep it." She didn't ask me how to fix it. That told me she was finally listening. Our mother, however, was not there yet. She invited me to dinner one evening alone. No witnesses, no distractions. The air felt heavy before either of us spoke. "I feel like I failed," she said suddenly. I looked at her. "At what?" "At keeping the family together," she replied. "At raising you both without resentment." I chose my words carefully. "You didn't fail because we're distant," I said. "You failed because you taught us that love had rank." Her eyes filled. "I didn't mean to." "I know," I said. "But impact doesn't wait for intention." She wiped her face, hands trembling. "I don't know how to relate to you anymore." I softened slightly. "Then meet me where I am, not where you're comfortable." That was the most honest offer I could give. She didn't accept it right away. But she didn't reject it either. That winter, something unexpected happened. A former colleague from my sister's old firm reached out to me privately. He had left Meridian months earlier and was now involved in a lawsuit alleging misrepresentation and internal pressure to suppress risk disclosures. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I want the truth documented." I listened carefully. What he described aligned with everything I had already seen. Not illegal enough to make headlines, but ethically corrosive. A culture built on intimidation disguised as excellence. I didn't testify publicly. I didn't need to. I helped quietly, structuring timelines, clarifying documentation, ensuring accountability without spectacle. When the settlement concluded months later, Meridian's board implemented sweeping reforms. My sister's name was not mentioned, but her legacy was unmistakable. And for the first time, I felt no satisfaction, just resolve, because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about stopping cycles. One evening alone in my apartment, I thought back to the moment that started all of this. The kitchen table, the pendant lights, the word freeloader said with laughter sharp enough to cut. If she had simply said no, this story would not exist. If she had helped me quietly, I might have returned to the role I was trained to play. But humiliation changes people. It either breaks them or wakes them up. That humiliation forced me to see something I had spent years avoiding. I was not weak. I was positioned that way. And once I understood that I could never unknow it. The following spring, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on ethical leadership. The topic they assigned me was unexpected: invisible labor and the cost of silence. As I stood on that stage months later, looking out at a room filled with women who had learned to survive by disappearing, I felt something settle into place. My voice didn't shake. I didn't rush. I told the truth. Not about my family. About the pattern. How often the person labeled difficult is simply the one who refuses to carry what was never theirs. How often asking for help is reframed as failure by people who benefit from your independence. How power panics when the quiet one stops apologizing. After the applause faded, I stepped off the stage and checked my phone. There was a message from my sister. "I watched your talk. I finally understand why you didn't come back smaller." I replied simply. I never should have been small in the first place. That night as I walked home alone, I realized something profound. The revenge was complete. Not because anyone had fallen, but because I had risen beyond the story they needed me to stay trapped in. And once you do that, there is nothing left to prove. Only a life to live on your own terms. The last time I thought about asking my sister for money, I couldn't remember how it felt to need it. That realization surprised me. Not because I had become wealthy or untouchable, but because the part of me that equated survival with permission no longer existed. I paid my bills. I chose my work. I rested without explaining myself. I asked for help when I needed it from people who did not confuse assistance with superiority. The old story had finally lost its grip. Spring returned gently that year. Not dramatically. No rebirth metaphors. Just longer evenings and open windows and a sense that my life was no longer paused waiting for approval that would never come. My sister came back to town once briefly. She asked if we could meet. I agreed. We walked through a public park side by side, not touching. She looked different, not diminished, unarmored. "I don't expect us to be close," she said. "I just didn't want to leave things unsaid." I nodded. "Go on." I was afraid, she admitted, all the time. Afraid that if I slowed down, I'd be replaced. Afraid that if I helped you, it would prove how fragile my position was. I stopped walking and turned to her. "So you chose cruelty instead?" She didn't argue. Yes, that honesty mattered. "I don't want to be that person anymore," she said quietly. I believed her. But belief didn't mean repair. "I hope you aren't," I said, "for your sake, but I don't owe you access to me." She nodded, eyes wet. "I know." We parted there. No hug, no reconciliation scene, just two women acknowledging what was and what would never be. And that was enough. My mother tried in her way. She stopped correcting me, stopped pushing narratives of unity. Sometimes she even listened without preparing a response. That was progress. My father changed most quietly of all. He began asking questions. Not to solve, to understand. He didn't interrupt, didn't redirect. He learned late in life how to sit with discomfort without outsourcing it to someone else. Watching that shift, however small, felt like closing a circle. The work continued. I stayed in my role not because I needed validation, but because it aligned with who I had become. I mentored younger women who reminded me of myself before I learned that silence was not a virtue. When one of them apologized for asking a question in a meeting, I stopped her gently. "Curiosity doesn't require permission," I said. She smiled like she'd been given something back. One evening alone in my apartment, I found myself thinking again about the kitchen table. The pendant lights, the laughter, the word freeloader delivered so casually, so confidently, like a truth everyone already accepted. If I'm honest, that word had hurt because it landed on soil that was already prepared. Years of being useful instead of valued, reliable instead of respected, quiet instead of seen. The insult didn't create the wound. It revealed it, and that revelation changed everything. I didn't write a letter to my sister. I didn't confront extended family. I didn't correct every false narrative that drifted through the grapevine. I lived. I built a life that didn't require me to disappear in order to belong. That was the consequence no one anticipated. Because the greatest revenge I could have taken wasn't humiliation or exposure or victory. It was refusing to remain available for a role that only existed to support someone else's identity. I was never a freeloader. I was the foundation. And when I stepped away, the structure had to either stand on its own or finally be seen for what it was. If you are hearing this and recognizing yourself in any part of it, I want you to remember something important. Asking for help does not make you weak. Being denied compassion does not make you unworthy. And being labeled by someone who needs you beneath them does not define you. It reveals them. You don't need to prove your value to people who benefit from you doubting it. You don't need to burn everything down. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand still, say no more than necessary, and choose yourself without apology. That night, before I went to sleep, I wrote one final sentence in my journal. I stopped asking for $1,000 and gained my entire life. And I closed the book knowing the story was finished. Not because nothing else would happen, but because I was no longer telling it from the place where I had been made small. I was telling it from the place where I finally stood, whole.